Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Markwell, for appearing. It's very much appreciated. This is a very important bill. Can I just ask, in view of the threats that were made against other witnesses, were you threatened for appearing?
No, I was not threatened.
Thank you. Now, the government says that we cannot trust social media platforms, and I agree with that. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. So the platforms are the problem. We need more transparency, not less. And yet, even though the government doesn't trust these social media platforms, it's asking them to do the censoring. Would you agree?
With this bill, or you mean in general?
No, with the government in this bill, it is getting the social media giants to do the censoring, foreign-controlled social media giants to do the censoring for it.
Yes, there is a system in place to hold them to account if they don't sort of meet certain standards. But yes, essentially, the social media companies are still doing it.
Right. I can't find anywhere in this bill where there is an arbiter of truth. Can you?
So, I don't think there is. No, I don't think there is any. No, I can't see that.
No. Doesn't that create enormous problems because it leaves open for the social media platforms, or if they're not doing it to the government's satisfaction, it leaves open to ACMA to be the arbiter of truth?
Well, I think the point of the bill is to demand higher standards of moderation from social media companies in relation to misinformation and disinformation, but it does link it to specific categories of harm. Our concern is that the categories of harm that are currently in the bill go too broad and that they should, especially the last three, I think in the list we have concerns about, but the others we think are important public harms that should be moderated against. And while there is no complaints mechanism or ability for ACMA to really act as an arbiter of truth per se, there is scope for evidence about harm that is coming about from misinformation and disinformation to be surfaced, and then for ACMA to act upon it. We do think, though, that ACMA needs to be separated from government in making these calls. Political officers should not be able to influence ACMA in relation to suppressing any content, and ACMA should also have very clear guidelines about what is, for example, when it comes to the harm of hatred, what constitutes dehumanising material, so they are really clear on that. And there is also support from the research sector, which I think this bill currently neglects and puts a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of ACMA without empowering the research sector to be analysing what is exactly happening on social media platforms.
Thank you. Your clarity is appreciated. Your recommendation 2 in your submission is to, quote, remove the last three categories of serious harm due to a lack of certainty, namely imminent harm to the Australian economy, far-reaching consequences for the Australian community, or a segment of the Australian community, or severe consequences for an individual, end of quote. Do you think these categories are designed to control political misinformation, which may be used to counter political harm rather than physical or emotional harm? I get your point that we're putting this in the hands of bureaucrats aligned with the government, whose future depends upon the government. So do you think they could be used to counter political harm rather than physical or emotional harm?
There is the risk of that.
Thank you. Your submission calls for transparency around communication into ACMA from the government, calling for a transparency register and a set of regulations around transparency in general. Should those be made available before the bill proceeds to a vote?
Yes. Absolutely. I think transparency is extremely important. We shouldn't be having higher standards on social media companies than we do on our own government. Our government should be transparent about any takedown requests or communications that are had with social media companies under these bills, particularly any that do impact on freedom of speech. And also, I think it's very important that media be included in the ambit of the bill, and that if you want to exclude media, that a higher threshold be provided for what constitutes professional media, because the current definition that the bill relies upon is too low and effectively excludes a huge chunk of current bad actors who are engaged in spreading misinformation and disinformation that has a very hateful effect about particular communities.
Thank you again for your clarity, Ms Markwell. There is no way of knowing at the moment who is restricting content, and there's no way of knowing inauthentic behaviour. And people are hiding behind pseudonyms, which means they don't have to be responsible for what they say. Isn't there a need for greater transparency from the social media tech platforms so that we can peek behind their censorship that already exists, just as you've said that ACMA needs to be more transparent?
Yes, so that has to be done, but with respect for privacy principles. So, for example, social media companies should be compelled to release data that doesn't violate privacy principles but shows us exactly what they are shutting down and and the reasons for it. And that is very possible. We've made suggestions about particular data that could be shared easily, and that would benefit also with our researchers being able to, in our universities, to be able to study those patterns and to advise the public, in the public interest, what forms of communication are being most suppressed, from which groups, and what are the reasons for that. I think that is important information for the public interest to know.
Suppression, as I interpret what you just said, suppression is the antidote of truth, of finding the truth. And isn't the best way to find out the truth, to expose the truth, free and open public debate?
That's more of a philosophical question, Senator. And I would say that there are boundaries to that which our law provides. So vilification is one such boundary. Incitement of hatred, severe ridicule, contempt, or anything that violates Section 18C of the Race Discrimination Act. Those are legitimate bounds on freedom of expression, as has been found by our courts. And therefore, operations that are running like a business, really, just to spread misinformation or disinformation about a group based on a protected characteristic to incite hatred, do need to have some form of accountability. And Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act and our vilification laws are not an appropriate avenue for these operations. If we were to bring a complaint against one of them, one of these, for example, they run very dehumanising stories about Muslims every day. If we were to bring a complaint directly against one of those bad actors, they would relish the opportunity to fundraise on the back of that amongst their support base, who think that they have the right and the license to make that hateful commentary about Muslims. So it would be completely counterproductive, and that's why we do need public regulators to have a degree of responsibility and not leave it up to complaint mechanisms. And that responsibility needs to be very tightly defined around very around very clear definitions of dehumanising material for actors that do it in a serial or systematic, repeated manner. And it should not be loosely defined, and it should be clearly linked to a protected characteristic. And we think that that is very possible for regulators to do in a responsible manner and to lift the burden that is currently on communities who are unable to fight such actors.
That would only be the case then if harms, as you point out, were more closely defined.
Yes, so we are okay with the current definition of the definition for hate or inciting hate in the bill. However, we do think that there needs to be so if they're going to, they seem to want to align the bill now to vilification standards or thresholds around inciting hatred, but those thresholds do have exemptions that are to do with, for example, artistic or academic contributions that are done reasonably in good faith. And in our submission, we've just said that should be also included in this bill to ensure complete alignment. Our view is that if this bill does not succeed, or even if it does succeed, it does need to have very defined standards of dehumanising material that it can use to ensure that there is not overreach from ACMA and to also ensure consistency in applying an equal standard to all human groups based on protected characteristics.
Senator Roberts, I'm going to need